Hello, hello, and good evening. I am Laura Goldman, the dietitian with Premier Weight Loss, and it's my pleasure to present to you what I consider a bit of a challenging, at least for me, topic. And it's about nighttime eating and whether or not eating late affects weight loss. And so I hope that you find this informative and maybe enlightening. It's caused me to pause and think on a few things and potentially change my mind on a few ways that I approach some of my counseling. So without further ado, we'll get started. As always, it's important to remember that it's the quality of your calories that matters. Whether you eat early in the day or late in the day, the quality can really bring home whether or not you're going to benefit long term or whether it might be more of an impediment to your progress. So what we're covering this evening is how your body might process food differently depending on the time of day. The word for it is chrononutrition. Also, since it's not always about eating, or since we might have different reasons for eating late at night, we will talk again about recognizing true hunger versus emotional eating or habitual eating. Some reasons why you might be dealing with some nighttime hunger. And I also give a little outline on the meal timing, what the pattern could look like, as well as offer a few strategies to start developing a healthy routine. Finally, I wanted to list some challenges for the week and offer up time for any questions you may have. About that chrononutrition. So this is the idea of the circadian connection with food. And this is an area that I actually struggle a bit with. I don't want to say being willing to accept. There is research out there, and the science backs up this idea that I'll talk about here, where it seems that we have greater insulin sensitivity in the mornings. So that means there's reduced storage of our calories as fat, more utilization. Also, diet-induced thermogenesis. That is where our bodies are burning calories to digest and process the food that we're eating. So we tend to burn more calories by digesting the food that we eat in the morning more than we do in the evening. So since we're having that calorie burn be lower, that could contribute to a little more storage of fat as well. And it does seem that based on a few studies, eating the majority of calories earlier in the day may help prevent weight gain. And there are people who are considered early birds and people who are night owls, and we can call that the chronotype. However, it seems that the chronotype doesn't matter in terms of whether or not eating late at night is beneficial or detrimental. It seems that the connection between difficulty maintaining weight, difficulty losing weight, regardless of what chronotype you are, eating later in the evening may impact that. And where I talk about having a struggle with this is frequently when people ask me, is it true whether or not, or is it true that I don't have to, or that I shouldn't eat after a certain time of day? Sometimes people will say 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. And my typical recommendation is that it's more about the foods that we are choosing later at night versus if we are eating late in the evening. So this type of science and this type of information challenges what my typical recommendations have been. However, even though I still might question whether this applies to everyone, since this, doesn't necessarily apply across the board to everyone, it is important to keep in mind that focusing on high nutritious food earlier in the day can be very helpful, especially with the thermogenesis that we've observed, with the insulin sensitivity that we've observed. Focusing in on that, I think, can have a net benefit. So while I would be averse to telling people a cutoff time necessarily for eating, these numbers and these figures here from the research do indicate that we may see a benefit from at least trying to limit our calorie intake as the day goes on, or as late as it gets. The next thing, however, of course, we might not just be eating our dinner at 10 p.m. We might not be living like a European there, but we might find ourselves snacking later at night. And this could be due to more of a habitual or a emotional response versus actual hunger. Typically, when we're winding down for the evening, maybe that's when the stress of the day is getting to us and we want to treat ourselves. Or a television show comes on and we're used to always eating while watching TV. Those mean that it's not true hunger. And so there we are just adding on calories that are unnecessary. And so those are also calories, especially being later in the evening, where we may have trouble with the energy utilization, as mentioned in the previous slide. Now we're also tacking on calories we may not need. So this is a little compare and contrast of true hunger versus emotional habitual hunger. And so typically with true hunger, we're willing to eat just about anything, maybe not some of our least favorite foods, but eating foods that are not particularly interesting. Whereas emotional or habitual hunger is typically seeking out a very specific flavor profile or chocolate, breads. People talk about having that pint of ice cream to deal with heartbreak. That's sort of the emotional hunger. And also, like I have it here where it's driven by how it's always done, as in, well, whenever I watch this show, I always have a snack to go with it, et cetera, et cetera. True hunger is a little more recognizable also because you will have hours between feeling hungry. It doesn't persist after you are satisfied. And you can use some of those other cues on here as well as a point of reference. However, there's some other things here while you may still feel hungry at night on GLP-1s. So we talked, the first couple slides were about people across the board, whether or not you're on a GLP-1. So you may ask yourself, why am I eating late at night? I thought these GLP-1s were supposed to suppress my appetite, which is true. However, there are some factors that can affect you very specifically because of the fact that you're taking a GLP-1. First and foremost, since you have that suppressed appetite, you may be eating too little. And if you have that suppressed appetite throughout the day and you've had very few calories, by the end of the day, it may get to the point where your hunger is breaking through that suppression because your body is saying, we have got to eat and get some calories. Similar to that idea is the skipping meals. There are some people who will skip meals because they've either gotten busy or feel like that helps restrict calories. But skipping meals can lead to that jump in appetite later in the day because if we are not eating enough, then we are going to have that jump in appetite because we do require calories for our bodies to function. I noticed a typo there with little. Forgive that there. And then finally, similar to when we're talking about that emotional eating with these psychological cues, eating for reward, just remember that just because a GLP-1 will suppress our appetite in general, it doesn't have an effect necessarily on an emotional response to eat. And so it's very important to identify what may trigger you. If it is regards to stress, be aware of that so that you can surround yourself with healthy foods if that should be a triggering moment. Or if it's habitual, again, the habit is important to identify and then try a workaround, whether it be a healthier choice or whether it be identifying a way to stay busy that doesn't involve having those snacks. We're talking about some meal patterns. This is simply an example. You do not have to follow this to the letter, but this gives an example on essentially preloading your day with healthy amount of protein as well as a healthy amount of calories to get your day started. And then we taper off as the day goes on. So you can see how the lunch is still focusing on balance, focusing on protein and fiber. And then the afternoon, there may be a need for a snack just to keep you going. And as I say here, to prevent nutrient gaps. And then dinner, ideally keeping it lighter than lunch. And Aim to finish about 2 or 3 hours before bedtime. This can also help if you have any issues like acid reflux, so keeping it light is beneficial in that way. However, after 8 p.m., I do list here that if you are truly hungry, you should still honor that hunger because it is important to get in enough nutrition. So, some small snacks like Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, then that might be very helpful. But if you know that your post 8 p.m. cravings are kicking in because it's a habitual response, etc., try and find some non-food strategies to keep yourself busy. Is it something like, although this might be a food strategy, but chewing on sugar-free gum? Is it finding a habit, then, or finding a new hobby? That might be very helpful. Moving on to some strategies to reduce the unnecessary nighttime eating. Like I mentioned, front loading your calories. So if you can try and have 50 to 60% of your daily intake completed by 2 p.m., you've gotten off to a great start. I mentioned to not skip meals since that can lead to overeating. And you do want to hit your protein target. One that helps you feel fuller longer, can help prevent that nighttime snacking feeling, and also can help preserve your muscle mass. I talk about pausing before you snack here, where you can either rate your hunger a 1 out of 10. If you hit a 5, try and drink some water or go for a walk or find what I call an idle hands activity. Like I talked about, finding a new hobby, like some people enjoy knitting, some people enjoy using those coloring books, or finding an activity that works for you. And again, though, keep those smart snacks available because you may still get the desire or urge to snack. Maybe it is emotional and it's just hard to get that out of mind. Then make sure to have something that you know at least will be a healthier choice and can help still get you to your goals for your overall health. Coming here near the end, I've got your challenges for the week. First, for challenge number 1, try and track your hunger both before and after each meal. So this is an idea of where you can see if you're eating a meal or a snack, are you eating this because you're truly hungry, or is it more out of habit? And what I would also say is find ways to identify when you are feeling hungry versus just bored. Sometimes taking the moment to pause and really work on that can be beneficial. And challenge number 2, I talk about front loading your calories. So try to commit to not missing breakfast and lunch if at all possible, and aim to get in about 25 grams of protein in that breakfast within 1 to 2 hours after waking. I do know some people do not have any appetite in the morning, and that's fair. I'm not going to make you completely reinvent the way that you're doing things, especially if breakfast might make you feel unpleasant. I know one person where she can't eat breakfast because it makes her nauseated. And that's been her entire life. So do what works for you. But if you can, I would say try to get this in. Or if you've not been a breakfast person but want to try it out, try for one day and see how that works. And you can do half of this goal. So if it's not 25 grams, if you don't typically eat breakfast, aim for 10 grams. Start small. And for a quick note here, if you're looking for something very quick, a hard-boiled egg is about 7 grams of protein. So that could be a way to start your day too. And just see how that works out for you. I'm always interested in hearing feedback and finding out if some of these challenges are helpful or at least insightful. So to put all this together, just remember that the timing of your eating can matter, even when you're taking a GLP-1 medication. And that goes for choosing to eat or choosing not to eat. So remember, timing either way can be very important. And remember that not all nighttime hunger is a true physical response of hunger. We have old habits that are hard to break, and so keep that in mind. Try to, like I mentioned, front load those meals, get in those nutrients for your breakfast and lunch, and hopefully that can help minimize some of the nighttime eating downfalls we can find ourselves in. And just remember, Rome wasn't built in a day, as they like to say, and building a new structure or routine with your daily eating behaviors also takes time. If you're interested, there are a few sources that I list here, since again, these were some newer concepts that I was talking about today. And then I leave it open for any questions you may have. All right. Well, it was an absolute pleasure this evening discussing this interesting topic. I hope you've gotten some insight out of it and that you might feel inspired to adjust maybe your current patterns of eating if necessary. If you do notice any changes in how you feel after doing so, I would love to hear about it. Feedback and personal experience is so beneficial to share with others, so I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.